Hello, my name is Nick Rojas, and this report will cover my Design Build Project 3 as part of Rob Carter's intermediate casting class at Cal Poly. The design guidelines are pretty open-ended, so I chose to cast some memorabilia for San Francisco's Carnaval since my family and I participate in it every year. The design was modeled after a Colombian sombrero volteado, which means turned hat. I chose this style hat because it's pretty iconic in Colombian culture and it is very easily identifiable. I decided to create this casting using the shell method since it lends itself to complex shapes and multiple parts per casting. I had the option to print multiple of these sombreros and use the sacrificial PLA process, but I 1. Wanted to create the shell method casting since I had the chance to, and 2. Wanted to experiment with 3D printed wax molds. This allowed me to quickly produce multiple copies with wax, a time-tested material that provides a finer surface finish and burns out easier than PLA. The patterns were made using the wax injector in the IME lab. The first couple of iterations had some defects as shown, but were eventually ironed out. Once the patterns were made, I assembled them into a wax tree. I had trouble using the glue wax, so I got around this by making small holes and using half-inch wax rods as dowel pins to hold them in place. The tree made it through 1.5 coats of suspender slurry, but regrettably broke during handling and coating. I was able to salvage half of the wax molds by placing the patterns that were still intact into a solid flask and casting them that way. The following simulations were done on solid cast 8 on my model. Right off the bat, it's interesting to see that it never reaches 100% completion. The initial velocity is quite high, but that's sort of expected with the configuration of the assembly. The temperature simulation shows some residual hotspots that are located towards the top, but the actual parts themselves appear to solidify pretty quickly. The pressure simulation shows some very high pressures towards the bottom, so it's interesting to see that the bottom parts didn't actually fill. Since ultimately my shell assembly broke, I stopped running simulations. If I was to run the simulations again, I would tilt the models to simulate an angled pour, and that could potentially help alleviate some of the issues in the pressure and velocity simulations. These are the parts as cast in brass, and one of the solid flasks cracked under vacuum, but it had very minimal flashing, and the parts turned out pretty good. These are some examples of my casting results. The one on the left is a lost PLA process in a solid flask. As you can tell, there's a lot of plaster still stuck within the words, and this one had a lot more pitting and a lot more surface roughness. This is a slightly smaller model, but this is one of the wax models that I did, and you can see that it has a much finer surface finish. Still has some of that plaster that I got to dig out between the letters, but overall it's a lot nicer, a lot smoother, a lot shinier. So it kind of, goes to show how much better the wax process is. And the nice part about it is that kind of embraced the build lines of the 3D printed model, and which is nice because it gives it a little bit more texture, sort of as a sombrero would naturally look like. So overall, I was very pleased with this wax process.